click the like button and subscribe to the channel before you dive into this epic story of revenge. Today, the king of Silicon Valley meets his anchor, and not to save him. The gut-wrenching hook. Act 1. The humiliation. He was the king of the city, and she was the woman he had discarded. At the most exclusive party of the year, Julian Cross, the tech magnate, held his new mistress close, openly laughing about the pathetic ex-wife he had left with nothing. He told his audience how he had upgraded, how his life had only truly begun after shedding that dead weight. The crowd laughed with him, but on the other side of the dazzling ballroom, the dead weight had just arrived. And she wasn't there to serve drinks. She was there to end him, and she had brought her father to watch. The Pinnacle Gala, held in the 80th floor observation deck of the Sterling Tower in downtown Manhattan, wasn't just a party. It was a coronation. And the man who was about to be crowned was Julian Cross. The air was thick with the scent of expensive perfume, rare orchids, and the unmistakable metallic tang of ambition. Floor-to-ceiling windows showcased a sprawling, glittering New York City. A kingdom of lights spread at their feet. Waiters in pristine white jackets moved like ghosts, balancing trays of champagne flutes and hors d'oeuvres that looked more like modern art than food. In the center of the liveliest, most fawning crowd was Julian. At 36, he was a predator in a tailored tuxedo. His dark hair was slicked back, and his grin, once charming, had been honed into a weapon of pure arrogance. His company, Cross Innovations, had just secured a 9-figure contract with the night's host, Sterling Tech, cementing his status as Silicon Alley's new golden boy. Clinging to his arm was Sloane Hastings, a 24-year-old who was less a person than a collection of expensive surfaces. Her dress was a strip of crimson silk that seemed to defy gravity. Her lips were surgically enhanced to hold a permanent pout, and around her neck sparkled a ruby necklace so large it looked heavy. "I'm just saying," Julian boomed, his voice cutting across the party's educated murmur. "You have to be willing to cut bait. You can't make it to the top if you're carrying dead weight." Some of his new friends, venture capitalists and rival CEOs, nodded sagely, sipping their drinks. "You're talking about your old business partner, right?" asked one of them, a man named Brody. Julian let out a sharp, contemptuous laugh. "Partner? God, no. Wife. And dead weight is putting it kindly." Sloane let out a little, sharp, bell-like giggle. "Oh, Jewel, don't be mean. She was, what was that word you used? Antiquated, like a little garden gnome." "Exactly." Julian snapped his fingers, delighted. "Antiquated, that's it. She was old-fashioned. She thought fiscal responsibility meant clipping coupons. She wanted me to keep the company small, manageable. Can you imagine that?" He gestured to the opulent room, to the city below. "Can you imagine this? Manageable?" The group roared with laughter. Julian leaned in, dropping his voice to a conspiratorial shout. "I'll tell you a story. A true story. The week before I landed the first seed round, the funding I busted my butt for, she had a panic attack. A panic attack because I had maxed out our last credit card to buy the servers we needed. She was crying, sobbing, in our awful little kitchenette, saying I was gambling away her mother's inheritance. It was what, 20,000? A rounding error?" "No!" Sloane gasped, clutching a hand to her chest, her diamond bracelet catching the light. "Yes," I looked at her. "Right then." Julian hardened his eyes. "And I knew she had no vision. She was an anchor. So I cut the rope. And look," he twirled Sloane in a small circle, her red dress swirling. "Look at the upgrade. Sloane gets it. She inspires me. She's not afraid of success." "I'm not afraid of anything, baby," Sloane cooed, kissing his jawline. "Except maybe bad lighting. Or," she added, her voice dripping mockery, ending up like, what was her name? The garden gnome? Eleanor, Julian spat, the name tasting like ash in his mouth. Her name was Eleanor, and trust me, you'll never end up like her. I made sure of that. The woman's probably waitressing at a tapas bar now. Honestly, I have no idea where she is, and I couldn't care less. He raised his glass. To upgrades, to cutting anchors, and to cross innovations. To cross, the group echoed, raising their flutes. Across the ballroom, hidden in the shadows near a service entrance she had just slipped through, a woman in a simple but elegant sapphire velvet dress froze. Her hand, holding a single glass of water, trembled. She had heard every word. The real dead weight. The revelation, the awful little kitchenette Julian had sneered at, was the only home Eleanor Vance had ever truly felt was hers. It was a third-floor walk-up in the Lower East Side, with peeling linoleum and a perpetually dripping faucet. But it had a window over the sink that caught the morning light, and she had filled it with fragrant herbs. This was 5 years ago. Julian Cross wasn't a king then. He was a brilliant, frantic, desperate coder with a mountain of ideas and a valley of debt. And Eleanor. Eleanor was everything. She wasn't just his wife. She was his co-founder, his bookkeeper, his project manager, and his entire support system. The $20,000 he dismissed as a rounding error was $40,000, and it wasn't a small inheritance. It was every last penny her mother, a quiet, hard-working librarian, had managed to save in her entire life. It was the money Eleanor had earmarked for a down payment on a tiny house, a home she could finally call her own after a childhood spent bouncing between relatives. Julian came to her, his eyes wild with a fire she mistook for passion. Elle, darling, this is it. This is the code that changes everything. But I need servers. I need real processing power. The VCs won't take me seriously with this laptop setup. Julian, she had said, her hands twisting in her apron. We can't. The credit cards they're maxed. We're tapped out on all three. Who needs credit? He had said, grabbing her hands. His were sweating. The house fund, your mother's money. It's just sitting there. Elle, it's an investment. In us. In our future. Give me 6 months. Just 6 months. And I'll triple it. I'll buy you a house on the beach. I promise. She had looked at his face, so full of desperate hope, and she had given in. She transferred the money. The company, Cross Innovations, was legally incorporated a week later. Julian, in a move she found efficient at the time, had her sign a pile of papers. Just formalities, sweetheart. You're the co-founder, but I'll be the CEO. You'll be, I don't know, chief operating officer. It's all just paper. We're in this together. Together meant Eleanor worked her boring 9-to-5 data entry job, came home, and then worked 6 p.m. to 3 a.m. managing Julian's books, debugging his code, and writing the business proposals he was too big-picture focused to concentrate on. She cooked every meal, paying for groceries in cash so it wouldn't show up on their bank statements. She was the one who stalled the landlord, who negotiated with the electric company, who sold her own mother's car to make the first payroll for the 2 unpaid interns they had hired. Julian was the vision. Eleanor was the anchor, but not in the way he meant. She was the one holding the boat steady in the storm he created, the one keeping them from crashing onto the rocks. The shift was slow, then sudden. The first seed funding round came through, $1 million. It wasn't Julian's frantic presentation that secured it. It was the meticulous 80-page business plan Eleanor had written, full of market projections she had researched during a sleepless week. The night the money hit the bank, Julian didn't take her to their favorite taco truck to celebrate. He took his 2 new VC friends to a steakhouse that cost $500 a head. Eleanor, he had said, should stay home and rest. They moved out of the kitchen in the Lower East Side to a glass-walled condo in Tribeca. He swapped his old hoodie for $2,000 Tom Ford suits. He stopped calling her darling and started calling her Elle. He stopped saying our company and started saying my company. The panic attack Julian had described was the night she discovered the formalities she had signed. He hadn't named her chief operating officer. He hadn't even named her an employee. He had registered her as a non-voting minority partner with a 5% stake contingent on her continued marital support. And the inheritance she had given him? He had declared it a personal loan to himself, which he had repaid to himself with company funds, and then declared forgiven. She hadn't had a panic attack. She had confronted him. You stole from me," she had whispered, the papers shaking in her hand. "You erased me, Julian." He hadn't even looked up from his laptop. "I built this, Elle. You typed. You copied. Don't be dramatic. I'm the talent. I'm the brains. You were just here. You?" The divorce was the final humiliation. His lawyers, a team of smirking sharks, painted her as an unsupportive, gold-digging housewife. The prenuptial agreement he had slipped into the formality papers was unbreakable. It stipulated that upon dissolution, her 5% stake was void, as she had failed to provide a supportive home environment, a clause his lawyers argued was proven by her financial hysteria. She walked away with $10,000, a generous parting gift from Julian, and her mother's maiden name, Eleanor Vance. She had stood outside the courthouse, clutching a small box of her few personal belongings, and made a vow. He had taken her money, her work, and her name. He would not take her future. She would rebuild, and if she ever got the chance, she would take back what was hers. Not the money, but herself, her dignity. She didn't know her chance would come on the 80th floor of the Sterling Tower, 5 years later, with the taste of Julian's casual cruelty still bitter on her tongue. The rebuild. Act 3, The Challenge. Eleanor Vance did not look like a garden gnome. She had spent the last 5 years in a crucible. The first year after Julian, she had, in fact, worked at a tapas bar in the East Village, serving cortados and avocado toast, saving every tip. She lived in a minuscule studio with no view and a loud refrigerator, but Eleanor was brilliant. She hadn't just been debugging Julian's code. She was a better, more meticulous, and more ethical programmer than he had ever been. She had a mind for systems, for seeing flaws before they became catastrophes. She took her tips and enrolled in night courses. She earned certifications. She freelanced, building a small but mighty portfolio under her new name. She was quiet, relentless, and ready. 2 years ago, she was hired as a junior analyst at a small sustainable technology firm, Vance Global Solutions, VGS. It was a modest company doing profoundly important work, specializing in green logistics and ethical AI. She thrived, was promoted, then promoted again. She was now a senior project manager, and her latest project, a new carbon-neutral logistics algorithm, was the reason she was at the Pinnacle Gala. Her company had partnered with Sterling Tech on a small subsidiary project. Her boss, a kind man named Mr. Wright, had come down with the flu. He had insisted Eleanor go in his place. "You have to be there, Eleanor," he had told her, through a hacking phone call. "Sterling is a shark, but his team respects data. Your algorithm is the data. You are the project. Go. Mingle. Just try not to let the atmosphere choke you." So here she was. She had bought her dress, a deep sapphire velvet gown from a designer she admired, at a high-end consignment store. It was worth every penny. It was elegant, powerful, and most importantly, it was hers. Her hair was pulled back into a sleek, intricate knot, and her only jewelry was a pair of simple pearl earrings, her mother's. She looked as though she belonged, which was why it was so jarring when Julian Cross, the man whose entire career she had funded, had just announced to the world she was likely serving drinks at a tapas bar. She stood in the shadow of a colossal ice sculpture, her knuckles white on the glass of water, her heart beating a painful rhythm against her ribs. The humiliation was a physical thing, a hot, squirming nausea in her stomach. She could feel the stares of people near the service entrance. They thought she was a gatecrasher. Just breathe, Eleanor. You are not that woman anymore. You are not his anchor. You are not his victim. She forced her shoulders back, lifting her chin. She was here to do a job. She was here to represent her company and her work. She was here to find Mr. Sterling, shake his hand, and discuss the Phase 2 implementation of her algorithm. Julian Cross was a ghost, a bad memory. She took a steadying breath and stepped out of the shadows, her modest heels making almost no sound on the polished marble floor. She scanned the crowd, looking for the telltale white hair of Lawrence Sterling. Instead, her eyes locked with his, Julian. He was 20 feet away, still holding court, Sloane still plastered to his side. He saw her. His eyes widened only for a split second. The laughter died on his lips. He saw her, not as the antiquated gnome he had been describing, but as the woman standing before him. Serene, beautiful, and radiating a calm intensity that, for a moment, made him forget his joke. But a bully's ego is a fragile, violent thing. Shock quickly morphed into amusement, and then a familiar, cold disdain. He hated that she didn't look broken. He hated that she was here, in his palace, on his night. He wanted to extinguish that light. He wanted to remind her, and everyone else, exactly who she was. He smiled, a slow reptilian smile. He put his champagne flute on a passing tray. He took Sloane's hand. "Jewel, darling, what is it?" Sloane asked, confused by his sudden silence. "A ghost, my love," Julian murmured, not taking his eyes off Eleanor. "A ghost from the past. Let's go say hello. We should be welcoming." He began to walk toward her, parting the crowd like a shark moving through water. Sloane, smelling blood, trotted happily at his side. Eleanor's heart didn't pound. It went cold. It stilled. She didn't run. She didn't look away. She simply held her ground, her mother's pearls a cool, steady weight on her ears. The king was approaching his anchor, and she was done holding his boat. She was ready to let him sink. The space between them crackled with 5 years of unspoken history, of bitterness, of theft, and of pain. The ambient noise of the party seemed to fade into a dull roar, the orchestra's strings sounding distant and weak. Julian stopped a few feet from her. He looked her up and down, a slow, offensive assessment. He noted the dress, the hairstyle, the pearls. He registered the expense, but his arrogance immediately recontextualized it as desperate. "Well, well." His voice was soft, buttery, and laced with venom. "Eleanor, I have to say I'm impressed. I didn't know they let the catering staff mingle." A few people in their immediate orbit turned, sensing the drama. Sloane, ever the faithful echo, let out a theatrical gasp. "Oh, Jewel, don't be cruel. She's not catering." She leaned in, her voice a stage whisper that carried 20 feet. "Are you, honey? Or did you just follow the sound of the money?" Eleanor looked at the woman who had replaced her, a woman wearing a rock on her neck Julian had likely bought with the proceeds from Eleanor's work. She felt nothing. No jealousy. Only a cold, clinical pity. "Hello, Julian," Eleanor said, her voice clear and steady. It did not waver. This, more than anything, seemed to infuriate him. "Hello, Julian," he mimicked, turning to Sloane. "That's all she's got? After all this time? I would have expected, I don't know, tears? Pleading?" He swung back to Eleanor, his smile widening. "What are you doing here, Eleanor? Seriously, are you lost? Did you get separated from your tour group?" "I'm here for work, Julian," Eleanor stated simply. This was too much for Sloane. The idea that this, the nobody, could have work at a place like this was an insult. "Work?" Sloane sneered, adjusting the garish ruby on her collarbone. "What? Did you find some rich old guy to be your arm candy? Where is he? Hiding in the restroom? Or did you just sneak in?" Julian stepped closer, invading her personal space. He was 6 inches taller, and he used it, looming over her. "Listen, Eleanor, I don't know what kind of game you're playing, but this is my party. This is my night. You're not going to ruin it. You've taken enough from me already." The audacity of the statement hit Eleanor like a physical blow. "You've taken enough from me." She who had been erased. She who had funded his entire existence. A slow, dangerous rage, a rage she hadn't allowed herself to feel in 5 years, began to uncoil in her stomach. "I took from you?" she asked, her voice perilously low. "Yes, you," Julian hissed, dropping the charming facade. His face was ugly now. "My time, my energy, my youth. I dragged you along for years, trying to get you to see the world the way I do, and you fought me every step of the way. You were an anchor, Eleanor, and now you show up here, in that dress, trying to… what? Make me jealous?" He laughed, a truly hideous sound. "Look at Sloane. Look at her. This is a woman who supports me. This is a woman who isn't afraid of success. She's not antiquated." Sloane preened. "It's true. I'm his muse." She held up her hand, wiggling her fingers. The engagement ring was a monstrosity, a cluster of diamonds so large it looked like a small galaxy. "And this is what a muse gets." She glanced at Eleanor's bare hands. "What did you get, Eleanor? A $10,000 check and a bus ticket out of his life? That's what Julian told me. He said it was the best money he ever spent." The circle around them had widened. Everyone was watching. Julian Cross, the man of the hour, was verbally eviscerating some poor, unknown woman. It was spectacular. Eleanor felt the stares like pinpricks, the humiliation, the shame. It was all there, bubbling up, threatening to drown her. This is what he wanted. He wanted her to cry. He wanted her to scream. He wanted her to make a scene so he could have security throw her out. He wanted to prove to his audience that she was, and always had been, the dead weight. Eleanor inhaled slowly. She closed her eyes for a single second. She pictured the kitchen in the Lower East Side. She pictured the formality papers. She pictured the look on his face when he had told her she was just here. She opened her eyes. The rage was gone, replaced by something far colder. A diamond-hard resolve. "That's a lovely necklace, Sloane," Eleanor said, her voice completely calm. Sloane and Julian blinked, thrown by the non-sequitur. Thanks," Sloane said, her hand flying to the ruby. "It's the Matisse ruby. Julian bought it for me at an auction in Geneva. It's practically priceless." "Priceless," Eleanor repeated, nodding slowly. "I see." She looked at Julian. "You always had a taste for things that looked expensive, Julian, even when you paid for them with other people's money." Julian's face went crimson. You have no idea what you're talking about. You're out of your league. You're a sardine, Eleanor, and this is the ocean." "Perhaps," Eleanor said. "Or perhaps you're just a shark who's been swimming in a kiddie pool for so long, you've forgotten what a real predator looks like." "Is that a threat?" Julian scoffed. "From you? Are you going to what? Write a bad Yelp review about my company?" "No," Eleanor said, a small smile playing on her lips. It was a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "I'm just here for work." She turned to leave, but Julian, enraged that she was taking the last word and hadn't broken, grabbed her arm. Not forcefully, but firmly. A possessive, controlling gesture he had used hundreds of times before. "We're not done here," he growled. "Take your hand off me, Julian," Eleanor said, her voice dropping to an icy whisper. "Or what? You'll call security?" "No," said a new voice, a voice that was deep, powerful, and conveyed the effortless authority of generations of wealth. "She'll ask me to." Julian, Eleanor, and Sloane spun around. Just then, the orchestra stopped, the ballroom lights dimmed, and a single bright spotlight hit the stage at the far end of the room. Lawrence Sterling, the CEO of Sterling Tech, stepped up to the microphone. "Ladies and gentlemen, friends, innovators, welcome to the Pinnacle Gala." Julian, flustered, dropped Eleanor's arm as if it were burning. The moment was broken, but as he turned toward the stage, preening for what he assumed would be his introduction, Eleanor looked past him to the man who had spoken. He stood near the stage, perfectly tailored, in his late 60s, with a shock of silver hair and eyes as blue and cold as a glacier. He had watched the entire exchange. He nodded once to Eleanor, a subtle, supportive gesture. Eleanor nodded back. Julian, oblivious, was composing his face into that of a humble genius, ready for his name to be called. "What a night!" Lawrence Sterling boomed into the microphone, his voice echoing in the silent, cavernous room. Sterling was a man who looked perpetually stressed, a thin veneer of joviality poorly masking a core of pure panic. "Tonight we celebrate the future," Sterling continued, spreading his arms. "And the future is innovation. The future is daring. The future is partnership." Julian straightened his tie. Sloane squeezed his hand, her eyes shining with reflected glory. This was it. "At Sterling Tech, we've always prided ourselves on finding the next big thing," Sterling said, his eyes scanning the crowd. "And this year, we found a titan. A man whose vision is only matched by his tenacity. A man who is about to change the world of biotech as we know it. Ladies and gentlemen, a round of applause for the man of the hour, the COO of Cross Innovations, Mr. Julian Cross." A wave of thunderous applause broke out. Julian, his face a mask of practiced humility, raised a hand to the crowd. He kissed Sloane, a public theatrical peck, and began his short walk to the stage. He even shot a smug, triumphant grin over his shoulder at Eleanor. "What do you think? Is Julian's fake humility more irritating than his direct mockery? Comment below and tell me which character you dislike more." Eleanor just watched him go, her expression unreadable. Julian climbed the 2 steps to the stage and shook Sterling's hand, pulling him into a one-armed buddy-buddy embrace. "Thank you, Lawrence. Thank you," Julian said, taking the microphone. "I'm truly honored." He wasn't. He launched into a 5-minute speech he had clearly memorized, packed with buzzwords like synergy, disruption, and paradigm shift. He spoke of his vision, his hard work, his sleepless nights. He never once mentioned a partner, a team, or a wife who had sold her mother's car to keep his lights on. Eleanor watched, not with anger, but with a strange, clinical detachment. He was exactly who he had always been. The only difference was that now everyone else might get to see it too. "And so," Julian concluded, "I accept this partnership with Sterling Tech, not as an end, but as a beginning. The beginning of a new era. Thank you." More applause. Julian reveled in it, raising his hands like a conquering hero. He handed the microphone back to Sterling and remained on the stage, basking in the spotlight. "Thank you, Julian. Thank you," Sterling said, patting his back. A true visionary. A true friend. Julian smiled. But, Sterling continued, and the energy in the room shifted. As Julian himself said, he is the next big thing. But even the next big thing stands on the shoulders of giants. And tonight, we are privileged, truly humbled, to have the giant in the room with us. Julian's smile wavered. He hadn't expected a follow-up act. At Sterling Tech, and indeed, Julian's company, Cross Innovations, we have been the recipients of let's call it, a guiding hand. A force in the world of global industry so powerful yet so quiet that most of us are unaware of his influence. This man, this benefactor, believes in the future of innovation. Sterling was sweating now, nervously reading off his cue card. He requested no fanfare, but I simply cannot let the night pass without acknowledging the true architect of this new partnership, the man whose quiet majority stake acquisition of Sterling Tech just last month made all of this possible. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome to the stage the chairman and CEO of Vance Global, Lord Arthur Vance. The applause was hesitant at first, then deafening as the name sank in. Vance Global. Julian's blood ran cold. Vance Global wasn't a guiding hand. It was the Iron Fist, a multi-trillion-dollar conglomerate that dealt in shipping, logistics, biotech, and, rumor had it, the quiet buying and dismantling of entire nations. They were a myth, an urban legend. Julian had never heard of a man named Lord Arthur Vance. He had always assumed Vance was just a name on a building. The crowd parted. The man Eleanor had seen earlier, the silver-haired older man with the glacial blue eyes, walked toward the stage. He moved with a quiet, unhurried grace, his bespoke suit fitting him like a second skin. He didn't rush up the steps. He ascended them as if they were his by right. He shook Sterling's hand, a quick, decisive gesture, and then stood next to Julian. The contrast was brutal. Julian, who had looked so imposing moments before, suddenly looked like a cheap knockoff, a child in his father's suit. Lord Arthur Vance took the microphone. He didn't tap it. He didn't adjust it. He simply spoke. "Thank you, Mr. Sterling. That was more than I asked for." His voice was a low, cultivated baritone, a transatlantic accent that could have been from nowhere and everywhere. "Sterling Tech is a fine company. Cross Innovations shows promise." He held the promise for an instant, letting it float in the air, making it sound more like an accusation than a compliment. "Vance Global believes in the future. We are investing heavily in this sector. We trust Mr. Sterling will continue to manage his division with the same diligence he has always shown." It was a clear, unmistakable message. "You work for me." Sterling's face paled, but he nodded, his fake smile pasted on. "Thank you for your hospitality," Arthur finished. He had not spoken for more than 30 seconds. He handed the microphone back to a trembling Sterling. The spotlight was still on the three of them. Julian, desperate to re-establish his dominance, thrust out his hand. "Mr. Vance, sir. Julian Cross. It's an incredible honor. I had no idea. I'm really looking forward to working with you. Vision." Arthur Vance looked at Julian's extended hand for a long, cold second. He did not take it. Instead, he looked past Julian, past the spotlights, into the darkness of the crowd. His icy blue eyes scanned the room, searching. He found what he was looking for. He stepped past Julian, ignoring him completely. He walked to the edge of the stage, his gaze fixed on one person, Eleanor. He descended the steps, landing silently on the marble. The crowd, sensing the climax of a drama they didn't understand, opened for him. He walked, not to Sterling, not to his new executive team, but directly through the heart of the party. Julian and Sloane watched, frozen in a tableau of confusion and nascent horror. Arthur Vance stopped directly in front of Eleanor Vance. The silence in the 8,000-square-foot ballroom was absolute. You could hear the clinking of an ice cube in a glass 50 yards away. He looked at her, his stern, imposing face breaking into a smile of warmth so genuine and breathtaking that it transformed him. "You're late," he said, his voice for her alone. But in the silence, it resonated. Eleanor smiled back, a real radiant smile. "The traffic was terrible," she said. He reached out and gently brushed a stray lock of hair from her cheek. "You look beautiful, dear. Your mother would have been so proud." He held out his arm. Eleanor took it. And then, Arthur Vance, the most powerful man in the room, kissed her on the forehead. "Hello, Father," Eleanor said. Julian's jaw dropped. The champagne flute he had just retrieved from a passing tray slipped from his numb fingers and shattered on the marble floor. Sloane's perfectly painted mouth formed a violent, ugly "Oh, Father," Julian croaked, the word a dry rattle in his throat. Eleanor Vance. Eleanor Vance. The antiquated gnome. It doesn't make sense. Arthur Vance's warm smile vanished, replaced by the glacial mask. He turned, his arm protectively linked with Eleanor's, and fixed Julian Cross with a look of pure, unadulterated loathing. "Mr. Cross," Arthur said, his voice lethally soft. "I've heard a great deal about you from my daughter, Eleanor." Vance right. The pop of Julian's glass was the only sound in the world. It was a gunshot, an execution bell. Every eye in the room was on them. Julian, Sloane, Eleanor, and the titan of industry who had just called her his daughter. Julian's brain was a screaming white void. Vance. Eleanor Vance. Claro was her mother's name, the librarian. He'd checked. He had. "But I don't understand," Julian stammered, a pathetic wheezing sound. Your last name, My name is Eleanor Vance," Eleanor said, her voice ringing with a new, reinforced clarity. She was no longer a ghost. She was a pillar. "I took my mother's maiden name when I left you. I always preferred it. I never saw the need to use my father's. I wanted to build something on my own. Without this." She gestured vaguely at the opulence, the power, the man standing next to her. "And she did," Arthur Vance's voice cut in, diamond sharp. He stepped slightly in front of Eleanor, a subtle, protective gesture. "She built a life. She built a career. She built an algorithm that, I must say, is the only truly valuable piece of intellectual property Sterling Tech has acquired this quarter." Lawrence Sterling, who had slunk off the stage, reappeared, his face the color of old oatmeal. "Mr. Vance, sir, and Ms. Vance, a pleasure. A marvelous surprise. We are delighted to have you." Arthur ignored him. His focus was entirely, predatorily, on Julian. "Mr. Cross," Arthur said, "I am a man who believes in data. I like to know the variables in my investments. So when my daughter's company, Vance Global Solutions, a small R&D division I set up for her, which she, I am proud to say, has made profitable in 2 years, was brought into the Sterling deal, I investigated all of Sterling's new partners." He took another step closer. Julian involuntarily took a step back. "You," Arthur said, "were a fascinating variable." Julian was sweating, his expensive tuxedo suddenly hot and tight. "Sir, I can explain. Eleanor and I, it was a long time ago. We were young. These things." "Were you young when you took the 40,000 of her mother's inheritance?" Arthur asked. The crowd gasped. Sloane's head snapped toward Julian. "An inheritance," Arthur continued, his voice an unforgiving, accusatory hammer, "that she had explicitly set aside for a home. Were you young when you convinced her to invest it in your vision?" It was an investment," Julian pleaded, his voice breaking. I paid it back. Oh, you did? Arthur nodded, a hideously pleasant smile on his face. I saw the books. My forensic accountants are very thorough. You repaid it to yourself. You logged it as a personal loan from yourself to the company, then used company funds, her money, to reimburse yourself. Tax-free. It was quite clever, and as my legal team has confirmed, highly illegal. It's called fraud, Mr. Cross, specifically fraud by deception and spousal asset misappropriation. Julian's world was tilting. No, the divorce, the settlement, it's all resolved. You mean the prenuptial agreement? Arthur raised an eyebrow. The one you made her sign while telling her it was just a formality. The one that disqualified her from her 5% equity because she failed to provide a supportive home environment. My lawyers loved that part. In fact, they have a counterfiling. It's 300 pages long, and it details, with bank statements and server logs, that Eleanor Vance, or Pendleton, as she was then, was not just your supportive environment. She was your co-founder, your lead programmer, and your chief strategist. You didn't cut the anchor, Mr. Cross. You were the anchor. She was the one sailing the ship. Julian couldn't breathe. He looked at Eleanor, his eyes wide with a new, terrified respect. This was not the antiquated gnome. This was an executioner. Why? He whispered. Why are you doing this? Eleanor, who had been silent, finally stepped forward. Her father's presence was her armor, but the words were her own. Why? She repeated, her voice trembling, not with fear, but with a terrible, righteous anger. You stood on that stage, Julian. You stood right there tonight, in front of the world, and you called me dead weight. You mocked me. You laughed at my mother's money. She stepped closer, forcing him to look at her. You didn't just divorce me, Julian. You tried to erase me. You tried to convince me, and the world, that I was nothing. You built your entire kingdom on my bones. You thought I was gone. You thought I was waitressing at a tapas bar. I did waitress at a tapas bar, Eleanor said, her voice ringing out. For a year. I saved my tips, Julian. I saved every single one of them, and I rebuilt my life. My life, not my father's. Mine. I'm here tonight, not as Arthur Vance's daughter. I'm here as the senior project manager of a VGS initiative I created. I'm here because I'm better than you. The silence that followed was heavy, absolute. Julian was broken. He was a shell. He had been so thoroughly, surgically dismantled that there was nothing left to say. But the execution was not over. Sloane Hastings, who had been watching this whole thing, was not stupid. She was a creature of pure survival, and she saw her diamond-encrusted lifeboat sinking. She took a step away from Julian. Jewel, she said, her voice shaking. Is that true? You lied to me? Julian looked at her, desperate for an ally. Sloane, darling, this is a misunderstanding. But Sloane's gaze had shifted. It had slid from Julian's ruined face to Arthur Vance's impassive one. She saw the real power in the room. Oh, Mr. Vance, she gushed, suddenly wrenching her arm from Julian's as if he were diseased. This is horrific. I had no idea. Julian told me. He said she was, oh, this is just terrible. I feel so used. She was changing horses midstream. It was a valiant, if disgusting, effort. Arthur Vance, however, was not amused. He looked at Sloane. His eyes dropped, just for a second, to the enormous, garish ruby on her throat. Miss Hastings, he said, his voice flat. Yes, sir, she said, brightening, her smile bright and desperate. That's a lovely necklace. Sloane beamed. Oh, thank you. It's the Matisse ruby from Geneva. Well, Julian said it's priceless. It is. Arthur nodded. The real one, that is. It is currently on loan from my private vault to the Met. It's a remarkable stone, famous for its pigeon's blood color, and for the small carbon speck inclusion just to the left of the main facet. A beautiful imperfection. He paused. Sloane's smile froze. Arthur continued. Yours is perfect. Flawless. Not a single inclusion. A truly remarkable forgery. It's a very high-grade cubic zirconia, I'm sure, but it is not the Matisse ruby. The color drained from Sloane's face. She didn't look at Arthur. She didn't look at the crowd. She spun, her entire body vibrating with a fury that eclipsed all reason, and stared at Julian. "Fake!" she shrieked, her voice breaking, echoing across the 80th floor. You lying bastard! You told me it was real. You bought me a fake ruby." Julian, who had been metaphorically executed, now faced a literal assault. With perfectly manicured, claw-like nails, Sloane Hastings ripped the necklace from her own throat. The clasp snapped. The heavy crystal, rubies, and diamonds scattered across the marble floor, bouncing like cheap gravel. "You're nothing!" she screamed at him, her face a mask of smeared, angry makeup. A ruined, lying anchor. And with that, she spun and stormed off, pushing through the stunned crowd, her crimson dress swirling behind her. Julian Cross stood alone, total, complete, and spectacularly alone. He stood in the wreckage of his life, surrounded by whispers, fake jewels, and the broken pieces of a champagne flute. The high, reedy echo of Sloane's rage seemed to suck all the air from the 80th floor ballroom. The clack, clack, clack of her retreating heels on the marble was a countdown to the end. And then, silence. A vacuum. It lasted 3, 4, 5 seconds. Then the whispers started. It wasn't a murmur. It was the sound of 100 small, sharp knives being unsheathed. It was the sound of reputations being carved, of fortunes shifting, of a social execution. It was the sound of vultures realizing the lion was dead. Julian Cross stood alone in a circle of ruin. The metaphorical spotlight that had been his anointing was now a harsh, unforgiving interrogation lamp. He was physically present, but he was already a ghost. His face, which had been flushed with rage, was now a waxy, gray putty. A single bead of sweat tracked a path down his temple, scoring a line through his panic-moistened skin. His eyes weren't on Eleanor. They weren't on the crowd. They were on the floor, fixed on a large, glistening piece of red-tinted crystal. The Matisse ruby. A fake. It had all been fake. His company. His mistress. His status. Everything. A high-grade cubic zirconia. And the man who knew the difference was now 10 feet away, holding the arm of the woman he had tried to destroy. He was a king, and he had just realized his entire kingdom was made of cardboard. Eleanor watched him. The terrible, coiled snake of anger that had lived in her stomach for 5 years, the one that had stirred when he grabbed her arm, was finally still. It hadn't been defeated in a burst of glory. It had simply uncoiled, sighed, and dissolved. She felt no triumph. She felt no giddy, vengeful joy. She felt nothing. Only the vast, quiet, deep emptiness of a great weight being released. The debt was paid. The books were balanced. She was finally free. Her father, Arthur Vance, sensed the change in her. The tension left her shoulders. He put his arm around her, a solid, steady weight. "Let's go home, Eleanor," he said, his voice a low murmur, meant only for her. "I think your work here is done." He was right. It was done. She had done what she came to do, and more. She nodded, ready to turn, ready to walk away from this room, this city, this entire chapter of her life. But as she took her first step, her gaze snagged on something, a face in the crowd, not a fawner, not a rival. It was a young woman, perhaps in her mid-20s, standing alone near a wilting floral arrangement. She wore a tablet clutched to her chest like a shield. Her eyes were wide, and she was looking at Eleanor, not with pity or morbid curiosity, but with a gaze of pure, unadulterated awe. Eleanor knew that woman. Not her name, but her. An hour earlier, before Julian's speech, Eleanor had seen her. The young woman had been trying to show her tablet to a dismissive Lawrence Sterling, as Julian and his cronies watched, smirking. "Predictive behavior modeling," Julian had said, his voice loud enough for everyone to hear. "Sweetheart, that's adorable. Why don't you fetch us all some more champagne? That's one behavior prediction I can agree with." The young woman had flushed crimson and crumpled. Julian had made a career out of crushing people. He had done it to that woman. He had done it in the most brutal way to Eleanor, and in that moment, Eleanor realized her work wasn't quite over. The destruction was finished. But the point of it all was about to begin. "Wait," Eleanor said. Arthur stopped, looking at her with an inquiring eyebrow. Eleanor stepped out of her father's protective embrace. She was no longer a victim being shielded. She was a power, moving on her own. She did not look at Julian. She did not acknowledge his presence. She simply walked past him, as if he were a statue, furniture, an irrelevant obstacle. The crowd, sensing a new, final act, went silent again. Julian, emptied, watched her move. He looked up, his eyes vacant, and watched her approach the young woman in the black dress. He didn't understand. Eleanor stopped in front of the woman, who for a moment looked like she might faint. Your work," Eleanor said, her voice clear and kind, yet ringing with an authority that was new to her, but fit her perfectly. "The predictive behavior modeling. I saw your abstract when my team was doing due diligence on Sterling's R&D. You did," the young woman stammered, her knuckles white on her tablet. Yes, your code for saturated networks. It was more than adorable. It was elegant." The young woman's eyes filled with tears. He said, "Everyone—" "I know what he said," Eleanor said, and for the first time, a small, genuine smile touched her lips. It was a smile of alliance. "Men like him, small men, are terrified of elegant code. They'd rather have you serving drinks than overshadowing them." She reached into the small sapphire blue clutch she carried. She pulled out a simple, thick, cream-colored business card. "Eleanor Vance, Senior Project Manager, Head of Ethical Logistics, Vance Global Solutions." She offered it. The young woman took it as if it were a sacred relic. "My division is hiring," Eleanor said. "We aren't looking for visionaries. We're looking for architects, people who want to build something real, something that works." She tapped the woman's tablet. "Email me on Monday. We'll do lunch." I will," the woman whispered, a look of fierce, nascent hope on her face. "Thank you, Ms. Vance. Thank you." "We'll see," Eleanor said, with a gentle nod. "Now go get a real drink. You've earned it." She turned, and now, finally, she had to walk past Julian to get to her father. He was still standing there, frozen, having watched the entire exchange. He had watched her, in his moment of ultimate defeat, poach the talent he had been too arrogant to even see. He had watched her build, effortlessly, in the smoking ruins of his life. He finally understood. This was not just revenge. This was replacement. She paused, just for a moment, directly in front of him. He flinched, his eyes no longer vacant, now pleaded. "Why, Eleanor? Why all of this?" She gave him her answer. Her voice was not angry. It was not sad. It was the cold, quiet, dispassionate voice of an auditor, delivering a final damning report. "You were right about one thing, Julian," she said, her voice so low he had to lean in, desperate for the words. You said I was an anchor. You were right. I was. For years, I was the only thing holding you up." She looked at the broken glass on the floor, the fake gems, the room full of new enemies. "I was the anchor, keeping your boat from showing the world what it really was, from sinking under the weight of your own arrogance. And now," she held his gaze, and in her eyes, he saw not a trace of the woman he had known. He only saw a vast, cold, empty ocean. "You're not a king. You're not a titan. You're just a bad investment." She didn't wait for a reply. There was nothing left to say. She turned her back. She walked the last 10 feet to her father, who was watching her with an expression of deep, immeasurable pride. She took his arm. Together, the daughter who had been erased and the father who had moved the world to find her, they walked away. They did not look back. The crowd, a sea of stunned and respectful faces, parted for them. They walked across the ballroom, out of the spotlight, and into the elevators. Their steps silent, their departure absolute. Julian Cross was left standing alone on the 80th floor. The music, a faint, beady string quartet, tried to restart, but sounded like a funeral march. His contract would be voided by 9 in the morning, his accounts frozen by noon. The name Cross Innovations would be a joke by nightfall. The king was dead, and the little, antiquated garden gnome had just inherited the realm. Conclusion and call to action. The epilogue of consequence. And so, the empire built on lies crumbled. Julian learned the hard way that the people you step on way up are the same ones you meet on the way down, especially when one of them is the daughter of the building's owner. Eleanor didn't just get her revenge, she reclaimed her life, proving that the best comeback is building an empire of your own on your own terms. Incredible ending. What did you think of Eleanor's final move? Was Julian's downfall a 10-10-10 of perfection? Or was the most satisfying moment Sloane's shriek over the fake necklace? Drop your favorite moment of karmic justice in the comments. And if you love stories where the dead weight turns out to be the one holding all the power, then you know what to do. Hit that like button. Share this story with someone who needs to see a bully get his comeuppance. And don't forget to subscribe to the channel. We drop new dramatic stories every week, and you don't want to miss what happens next.